Welcome everybody to Puppet Camp, London 2014, whatever it is. My name is Gary Larissa. I'm a professional services engineer with Puppet Labs. So I go around and do basically the consulting on site, talking. If you Google search Puppet, you'll probably see some shit that I've said. Things like that. And we're just going to give you a brief introduction to Puppet, talk about the state of the industry now, talk about what's new inside Puppet, all sorts of things. I do roam around, so I'm sorry, but we are taping it. And it's funny, we actually do have spike marks so that I know how far I can go, so when I'm making any like gestures or anything, I'm going to pop over on that side, and then I'm going to come back over here to continue. But basically, this is a talk that our founder, Luke basically delivers to welcome people to Puppet Camp, because we found that in the past we would start talking about things in current state of Puppet, current state of IT, and a lot of people were new to automation, or new to Puppet, or new to any of that type of thing. So we wanted to basically get a welcome introductory talk that kind of warmed you and welcomed you into it. One of the first things that we usually do when we start to talk and give the introduction is just some basic polls so that I can see in the audience about what level, what kinds of groups of people we're talking to. So who is using Puppet right now? Awesome. Far and away, most people. Who's using some other automation tool? Awesome. The doors are up there. You can file up, out, and then around. Who's using some automation, but it's something they wrote themselves? Scripts, all sorts of things. Yeah, that's good right there. So who's not doing any automation whatsoever at all? One brave gentleman. Thank you. Welcome to. And the last one, just to not be annoying, who is brand new to Puppet? I mean, who just started with Puppet? Good. That's what we're usually seeing. So just to recap, a fair good bit of you are using Puppet out there. A good portion of the crowd is new to Puppet, and that will lend itself to what we're going to be talking about, because there is a lot going on, not only with Puppet Labs, but the state of the industry. And we're finding that there are a lot of complicated and big problems that are still out there that really haven't been solved, or that we're working at, or that we're cracking at. And we're also finding that being a sysadmin is actually really hard. Most of us come from an operations background. I myself come from an operations background. Luke, who wrote the tool, was basically a sysadmin doing all sorts of scripting things and saying there has to be a better way to do this. Because the life of a sysadmin itself is really difficult and tedious and annoying and thankless and all sorts of things. And one of our favorite studies that we cite is we note that sysadmins are typically being interrupted about once every 15 minutes. And every time you get interrupted, it takes about 30 minutes to regain your focus, which means that sysadmins typically get no work done in the history of ever, because you're usually firefighting. People are interrupting you, asking you for something, you're focusing, changing, switching over to that, trying to regain what you were doing before, browsing Reddit, going back to what you were doing before you were getting interrupted, and back and forth. So it's this continual pressure to both do the firefighting and solve these problems as you're getting interrupted, and then focusing more on what the general problems of the business are. How can we deploy faster? How can we build out systems that are better so that we're not forgetting to change small sysadmin configuration items, things like that. And it is more critical than ever now, because companies are realizing that technology, what you do and how you manage your tech, has to be a competitive advantage. In the 90s and early 2000s, we saw a lot of outsourcing. Companies that said, hey, look, technology, we're not a technology company directly. Or we can maybe bring somebody else and do tech, because that's not our core competency. So there was a lot of outsourcing. There was a lot of, hey, we'll get a company that will do our email, that will do our servers, that will do our phones, that will do our whatever. And we saw in the latter half of the 2000s, people were turning that around, bringing back into the company, because they're realizing that technology is a competitive advantage. If you can get things done better, you actually can be better than your competition. If you can deploy faster, if you can have more changes, if you can evolve, that's your competitive edge. regardless of whether you're a technology company. I don't care what company you are, if you can change your product faster than your competition, that's basically how you can win. And that's it. That's what we're trying to do and help you do, is to make things go faster. How do I move more quickly? And it's not just necessarily the velocity itself of how can I spin this machine up faster, but again, like I said, how do I accelerate cycle times? How can I evolve or make a change and push it out there so that customers are going to be happier, quicker than somebody else does? So it's, again, ship faster, more changes to your competition. And really, that's the focus that we're seeing. We're also seeing a lot of this magical word called DevOps out there that people are tangentially aware and have heard of for a lot of time. And we've taken a really big interest into this great big thing called DevOps, more specifically about what is it and how does it help us be better at what our jobs are. And so for a couple of years now, we've actually been publishing what we call the State of DevOps report. We've surveyed a great number of people, thousands of people, I think around 9,400 people this year alone, and asking them things like, what are you doing? And also, what are you saying that you're doing in your company? And then also taking that and checking the correlations between what you're actually doing, what you're saying you're doing, and how good you are at your job. How many times are you shipping? How often are you able to really adapt to the market? How well is your company doing? And we're trying to define and have real good hard data with those links. And what we found, if you haven't read it yet, you really definitely should skim through it, is that there are strong links and strong correlations between the things that we've identified as DevOps culture, where operations is borrowing a lot from the developers, things like version control, things like virtualization really well, like automation. And companies that are doing this are actually doing much better than companies that are not, which to us seems like, no. But we're finding with numbers, companies are basically deploying up to about 30 times faster when they've adapted DevOps cultures. They're basically being able to adapt. That's that thing what we were saying before. That's what the whole DevOps lifestyle and culture is about. And it's not necessarily about a specific tool chain. It's not specifically about that you're using, VMware for virtualization or containerization or something. It's just the fact that you are doing that and you are integrating it and you're being better adapting and changing. And that's what we're really trying to help you do. We're also finding that people are really, really sick of hearing the word cloud. But what it represents, that whole virtualization, is something that's helping the industry. You don't really have to buy as many servers. I mean, who is really buying physical servers unless you're really needing that raw I/O? A lot of people are using this virtualization out there, whether it's public, something like an EC2, whether it's you inside your organization building up your own virtualization store, and you're figuring it out right. Because what we found with the whole outsourcing in the 90s and 2000s was that while outsourcing itself seemed like a really good idea, they outsourced at the wrong level. We tried to outsource up here and say, look, we want a company that does everything. Like I said, we want you to be good at file serving. We want you to be good at websites. Be good at the phones and things. And as we're evolving, we're realizing that no one person has to be good at all of that. You can be good at one specialized sort of thing, and then we can use that. A company that's using this virtualization or the cloud or EC2 to be a better, web service. We can now use that to allow us to focus on the thing that we really do at our company. And that sort of level, that SaaS, the software as a service, is a really good idea because we're seeing that it allows you to specialize on what you want to do. The company that offers the SaaS can actually focus on that need that you have and adapt. So yes, we're getting sick of hearing cloud, but it's becoming more and more important for regular companies to basically adapt to these principles. We're also seeing a lot of things with immutable infrastructure, Docker out there. Everybody's excited about Docker. They're not really quite sure why. They know it's definitely going to change the world though. And basically the point that we're making with this is the whole ideas behind that this immutable infrastructure is a good thing. Taking these giant monolithic applications, these big things that we have, and breaking them down into smaller pieces that we can then put on different machines, on machines that basically don't have that life cycle we had before. In the past, uptime was a giant metric for everybody. You know, we were going from like 3-year server life cycles down to, in some cases, some businesses, 3-hour server life cycles. A server comes up and is used between lunch and dinner, and then it's spun off and it's gone and it's ephemeral. So that's really what we're focusing on, is that trying to make a better application, trying to make a better process, defining newer, better tools to solve these complex problems, break them down into smaller parts, and then again, push them off into areas that do that really, really well. We're also seeing a lot of this, shadow IT, as we're calling it. And in some ways, this is kind of the impetus that begat Puppet. We're finding that sysadmins used to be the party of no. That it was easy for an operations team to sort of hold the keys and the gates to this, and devs would come up to you and say basically, hey, we need this, I need this many machines, I need to make my tool chain a little bit faster or better. And if you didn't understand that before, the operations side could say, well, no, that's not something we're really going to do. But now with all these tools that are out there, we're seeing where developers in a lot of places, and even operations teams that are constrained by some other sort of process, are being able to spin up their own IT levels, maybe push it out into some cloud service or some web service, just to get work done, to be better. And that was essentially what Puppet did a lot of. Hey, we really need to get these things done better. We can manage these systems on our own with our own automation system. But that's sort of where Puppet Labs comes in. We basically allow you to automate these repetitive procedures and these manual tasks so you can focus on things that are a little bit more complex, a little bit more interesting problems, and iterating at your own business. And Puppet itself allows you to do that. As an automation scheme, it allows you to basically everything up there, make rapid changes, and focus on what you want in the end. A lot of times, not necessarily how to get there, but that's what you want to get. Puppet is really good and allows you to automate the management of things like users and packages and groups and firewalls and DNS and all that sort of thing across multiple different operating systems. Not only operating systems, but also we're extending out into actual device support. Network devices, things like Cisco switches, storage devices, all that sort of things, all the way up to applications. That's where Puppet's being. Did anybody go to PuppetConf this year by any chance? Or anybody watch the live stream? That's really what Luke was focusing on, that sort of the future of Puppet is to have this small agent just be everywhere, out there, so that the language of Puppet becomes the language of IT, and you can speak and focus on basically managing all of these things really, really quickly and easily. And what the whole greater goal of automation in Puppet itself gives you is, like we said before, speed. The ability that you can make these quick, rapid changes. Productivity is basically you don't have to focus on it anymore. You can set it and create your Puppet manifest, your modules, pull your data out, and know that that machine's going to come up the same time every time. You spin up a new one, it's going to basically look like everything else. And Insight is something we're more specifically focusing on. Now that we understand that Puppet is the thing that allows you to make these machines all the same, to be quicker, to be better at what you're doing, now you can introspect to some of the data. Puppet gives you an awful lot of data, and we're using that a whole lot better with things like PuppetDB, with our Puppet Enterprise console, with some of these applications we're going to talk about and see later. to see exactly what is going on with your infrastructure. We're finding a lot of people find it really, really hard to answer that question of what changed, right? Puppet gives you that data. So the Puppet approach is a declarative approach. Like I've said before, we're basically focusing on what you want, not necessarily how to get there. You're defining the state that you want your nodes to be in. Basically, you're allowing yourself to test these infrastructure changes before they can be rolled out. Puppet allows you to query what the current state of your machine is. Your Puppet manifests in your code allow you to define what the end state should be. Now you can just query for those differences. Once everything looks the way you want it, you can use Puppet to enforce that desired end state. And then the reporting aspects give you all the information on your infrastructure. So looking at how the code works, again, a lot of this was for an introductory audience. We have a lot of people using Puppet out there, but if you've not, basically Puppet itself is meant to be more of a configuration language, not necessarily a programming language. It's basically allowing you to specify what you want in a lot of different ways. At the very low level with things like resource, when you're talking about a specific package or a specific file, or bumping it up the chain and allowing you to say, here's classes for things to define greater levels on your machine. And then putting it all together. Yes, all the examples that we have. Puppet itself, we have a basic modular focus on how to do things. The Puppet Forge is out there that has many, many, many modules to focus on specifically what you want to get done. Do you want to manage things like NTP? Do you want to manage something like Java or JBoss or Tomcat? So these modules are very reusable, and we're focusing on that reusable focus so that you can keep hold of your data, what versions of Java you have in all your environments, or what versions of your applications that are out there, paths, directories, and share or reuse modules that either the community has used, modules that we have endorsed as Puppet Labs and said, here's the ones we're developing, or modules from the community that we're actually blessing and saying they're doing really, really well. And once you've defined your infrastructure, basically the way that it works is every one of your nodes is going to report back things called facts, inventory items, to say what's the operating system, what's the version, maybe what's the number of users. And with that data, the Puppet Enterprise server basically gives you this thing called the catalog that focuses your end state. You then enforce that on every one of your machines, and you get report data back. What changed on the machine, or did nothing actually change, that you can get sent to our Puppet Enterprise console and then review later. A couple of years back, we introduced a product called PuppetDB. PuppetDB is basically meant to be the central storage, the place for information that Puppet knows about Puppet. It holds things like all of those catalogs or that focused desired end state for every one of your nodes. All the facts, the inventory items they've reported back, all the edges, all the dependencies between everything. So with PuppetDB and PuppetDB's API, you can actually query it to get your data. A lot of the tools we're developing and the tools that are out there in the community, Puppet Board, right, are using PuppetDB's data to actually present this in a more visual way. And that is going to be the way forward. PuppetDB was one of the first tools that we actually built on the Clojure platform. We went outside of Ruby and built it on the JVM and Clojure so that it could be very, very performant. It's something that we could focus on. And PuppetDB is going to be the place when you build your external tools and you want to ask Puppet what its information is, that's where you can get it. We also have MCollective for what we're calling execution. MCollective is basically like a nervous system. It is the way that you can go out and basically query for all your nodes out there. Puppet itself is a pull-based model. All your nodes check in with the Puppet master server. It's very good with regard to security that way because it's all client initiated and it requests its catalog. Whereas sometimes you need to go out there and find nodes. Maybe you need to query nodes that are, hey, show me all nodes that are in the development environment. Show me all nodes that are running this version of Apache. Maybe there was some widespread bug out there that has a name that's a dog or something. Or maybe there's another SSL vulnerability that's been published in the past like 10 minutes. And you need to see where your exposure is. MCollective allows you to query for those nodes based on their metadata and not necessarily their host name. Because I know none of you out there have host names that are this big that have every bit of information embedded inside it anymore. MCollective is that tool that we use for that execution to be able to not only query nodes but perform actions for that. When the Heartbleed bug came out, MCollective was a way to basically query and see what nodes out there were vulnerable and then push out and enforce a change very, very quickly. The other thing that was introduced at PuppetConf, not camp, but PuppetConf this year, was the next-gen Puppet server. We've actually written a Puppet server that runs on top of the JVM for a couple of reasons. One, we found with PuppetDB that it was a very performant platform. It's really, really interesting to look at a couple of the talks from the past two PuppetConfs. There's a gentleman by the name of Deepak. Deepak has given talks about the whys of PuppetDB, and there's really good information on when they wrote it, the number of bugs. Basically, percentage of bugs to code just dropped, but also the performance spiked. We've taken what we've learned from PuppetDB and extended that out to the core Puppet service and basically written it for the JVM. The JVM not only gives you that performance, but it also gives us a lot of metrics. There are a lot of established tools out there for the JVM we've been using for a while that will allow you to say, hey, what's the slowdown, or why is this doing really, really well or not really, really well? And with our support team, we have a lot of customers that call in because you can do a lot of crazy things with Puppet, and it feels like Puppet would be the problem. We had a customer that called in and said, hey, our runtimes take a long, long time. They're on the order of minutes, basically, and your Puppet tool kind of sucks because it's really, really slow. Okay, thanks, bye. And with the support team, they sort of racked their heads until they found that this customer was using a function that they had written that had done recursive queries. So for 30 seconds, just one function call showing up in a catalog would extend their run by 30 seconds. That was a very simple fix they made to the function, and runtimes dropped down exponentially. The moral of the story is the new JVM Puppet server allows us to get these metrics on specific components and parts of Puppet like we couldn't before, so that we can diagnose and see what's, again, working really, really well or not working really well. Those are some of the basic core things that we'll talk about, and later on during the day, Stephen Thwaites is going to give us a demonstration in the new version of Puppet that has those things that I've talked about. But also there are some advanced capabilities that you may or may not be using that's out there. We have a tool out there called Razor for provisioning. Razor allows you to basically have a sort of template-based approach to provisioning that you did with a system. So it allows you to basically do your kickstart, jumpstart, upstart, whatever, on multiple operating systems, from a Debian focus, a RHEL focus, even on Windows. So Razor is our provisioning tool that's out there that you can actually allow you to do more provisioning. Hier is another tool that's, when you're talking to people that are brand new to Puppet, it's a really hard thing to talk about. It's one of those things that, oh, hey, here's a problem you don't know you're going to have, but you're going to have, so here it is. But basically the problem is everybody thinks they're unique. And again, I blame it on our mothers, but it's that everyone has unique data that's out there. You're running different versions of Java on different machines, let alone different environments. Like I said before, different paths and things like that. Hier itself is a tool that allows you to basically separate all this data from the reusable Puppet code. So now all the changes that you need to make are just in this little tiny bit over here. If you need to expose to your developers access to Puppet to be able to enforce changes to systems that are in your infrastructure, you can basically expose them access to Hier, which is where you keep things like this application in the production environment is running this version. Instead of having to open up all your Puppet code and wade through and then make changes there, you can just open a YAML file or a database backend and just tweak, make that change, and now that enforcement's going to go out to all your nodes. So that's what Hier represents, is basically a data code separation mechanism. And we also have a tool out there called R10K, which follows the Puppet practice of being really bad at naming things. Does anybody right now use R10K out there? Who's using R10K out there? Good friends, awesome. R10K is basically a deployment mechanism. It's a way to have a repository and say that every branch of this repository will automatically create me another Puppet environment where I can test out my Puppet code, right? It is workflow where in the past, for you to have to do this required 15 to 30 steps to make changes, push code out to every one of your servers. Now, you can have a central repository that you just file a pull request, accept it, and then all of your Puppet masters immediately will get a new environment with code at the versions that you've specified, with data at the version you've specified. It's a really, really awesome thing that has a terrible name. Definitely check it out. I'm sure there will be people speaking about it today, or we have blog posts and other good kinds of things. And then, of course, open source Puppet is out there. We've basically taken a focus that Puppet itself, the platform, is really, really important to us. Yes, we are a software company. When Luke originally started this, that was his focus, was that we wanted to be able to provide this open source cool thing called Puppet. But also to be able to provide really, really good software too on top of that main Puppet platform. And that would be the thing that companies get paid for. That would allow us to employ more engineers to make better software you get the whole idea. So Puppet itself, the open source Puppet, will always be our core platform and the underlying everything for what we're doing in Puppet. So that's a basic review of all those things. Let's talk just a little bit more about what's new in Puppet Enterprise. We just had a new release on the 11th day of the 11th month. One of those dates that's actually correct over here on this side of the pond and the other side of the pond. And Puppet 3.7 is what we are basically focusing on with a lot of this what new. It's a giant release for us. It introduced the thing that I talked about a bit earlier, that Puppet Master Server running on the JVM, and that it's got what we're calling Puppet apps. As I explained before, the open source Puppet will always be our core platform. We want to build and extend applications on top of that core platform. And we've taken the focus that really all the harder things, the really complex, difficult things that you're doing with Puppet are going to be on the server side. That's where your Hier and your R10Ks and your whatever are going to focus. So with Puppet Enterprise, we've taken a real keen focus on the server side and built things called Puppet apps. And the first Puppet app that's out there is this thing called the Puppet Node Manager. It's a way, well, we'll talk about it in the next couple of slides. Everything we're going to talk about here in slides, except for the last two, so I'm going to focus on those Puppet supported modules. We have a focused module team in-house in Puppet that now curates the modules under our Puppet Labs namespace, but also reviews on the Forge community modules that are really, really good. Why should Puppet Labs really redefine a module when somebody out there has done it really, really well? So we're blessing those. We're basically supporting those modules and saying, yes, here's a module that has a lot of backing, that has a author that's very responsive to change, something that we can basically put our name and our stance behind. And then also the updated installer, we're doing more and more things to make it much easier for you to scale out when you're using Puppet Enterprise. Jumping back a little bit as I got ahead of myself when I started talking about Puppet applications, there's basically the idea of what we want. To have applications that focus on specific parts of Puppet that are difficult. One of the first ones that we have out there is the Puppet Node Manager. So this is classification. This is how does a node, when a node comes in, know what it should be? Should it be a web server, an application server, a something out there, a reverse proxy? So we've built this tool called the Puppet Node Manager that allows you to have rule-based classification for your nodes. Luke's described it a bit as like smart playlists out of iTunes. So that basically you can say, if a node comes up that's out here in EC2 that has more than 2 gigs of RAM, I want it to be a PostgreSQL, I don't know why you'd have your database out there, something like that, that based on what a machine looks like, it can get some classification. So that now you can just spin up thousands of nodes that automatically know what they should be. along with 3.7, and again, when I mentioned earlier about the JVM on Puppet, is we get a lot of these metrics. And we've now built basically some pre-packaged Graphite reports. And if you already have Graphite up and running, we have them there for you. But basically this Grafana view of certain things. Compilation times. Again, here's function execution times, which had been us before. Requests. You can get really, really granular to see what parts of your Puppet infrastructure are doing really well and other things that maybe you can focus on. It used to be dirty black voodoo magic to try and figure out. You'd have to send out one of our PSEs to see what's going on. Now we're trying to expose that to you, to allow you to basically take more control of your infrastructure, to get more insight into what's going on. Being able to see, hey, what are the changes that are out there? Puppet itself can be really noisy. And how do you know whether maybe I pushed out a single change to my message of the day file versus maybe I updated this core application? And if you have a change to your message of the day file that fails, is that on the same weight as basically an application deployment that's out there? Those of you wearing pagers should say no. But that's what we're really trying to expose to you. Get this data out there so that you can say, okay, if it's a failure, is it something that's key and critical, something that should be alertable or not? And so what? Why does any of this matter? Why are we even talking about this? Basically, it's something we said before. With a lot of our data, we have teams inside Puppet Labs that's focused on basically querying our users, seeing what their experience has done. Again, compiling that DevOps report and seeing how these changes to the industry have really affected. And we found that yes, you can deploy code much faster with a lot of these DevOps principles, with things like automation, with Configuration Manager. You're finding, or we're finding, that there's a lot less failures out there, a significant level less failures, up to 50% fewer failures with your things like your changes to your systems and deploys, based on people that are using things like configuration management and testing procedures. And we've also found, which when you look back on it, it should just make sense, but it contributes up to 50% higher market cap growth over 3 years just by companies that are using these principles of automation, that are taking sort of the manual steps and the tedious problem out there. We've also found that Puppet itself is one of the fastest growing tech skills out there and requests. I mean, greater than things like you're seeing it up there, like Salesforce or Hadoop, or even, there's that magical, awesome cloud word that's right there. And we're seeing a lot of our customers and people that are both using the open source and the enterprise side getting a lot of benefit out of this. One of the interesting stories comes from Pinterest, which, does everybody know what Pinterest does over here? It's really interesting. We're seeing in parts of Europe where people have no idea what Pinterest is. It's basically another one of those social media things where you can pin pictures of stuff that you may want to buy but may never actually buy, or cool things that are out there. But basically what Pinterest found as this service, another social media service, is that they have spikes of usage that are really predictable. They have a really big spike right around breakfast, and then a lull and a really big spike over lunch, and then a lull, and then a big spike over dinner, and then throughout the end of the night. And by keeping track of this data, they're able to tune their configuration management, their automation, everything, and be able to, an hour before a big spike, spin up nodes out there in some cloud or an EC2 or whatever to prepare for it. And also, once the spike is going and flipping down, to spin down those nodes. They found that when they were able to tune just the spinning down of these nodes by a factor of like an hour, they were able to save up to about $300,000 a year just by spinning down nodes quickly, or a little bit more quickly out there. It's that tuning, it's that focusing on your automation that you have that's allowing you to be better at what you're doing. CERN is a user of Puppet. They're managing a couple of their systems, like 100,000 of their systems. That's getting an awful lot of data about this big sciencey thing that's out there. So CERN is using it to compile. Basically, they need to be very, very precise. They're using Puppet to do that. And then also Bank of America. And Bank of America is one of the largest American banks. I don't know if they're the largest, but they're one of the largest. But surprisingly, they're using some of the most applications out there of any other company in the US because of a lot of the things that they're doing, both customer facing and not customer facing. And they're controlling that deployment both on the Linux side, on the Windows side, with things like Puppet. So basically Puppet is allowing us and allowing them to be better in doing what they're doing. So regardless of where you are in your automation journey or what you're doing, we know we're still basically at the beginning. When you think about the history of transistors, like how long things like computers have been out there, things of just how long managing computers we are still in our infancy. There are still a lot of really big problems to solve. And that's what we at Puppet Labs are really focused and keen on doing. And you too can come and join and plug in and get involved. We have all of our message boards that are out there, ask.puppetlabs.com, which allows you to basically ask and vote for questions that are out there. Our mailing list, our IRC channel, which is serving up thousands of people that are listening every day. Or you can check out things online. We have our learning VMs, more information and docs, and everything that we're pushing out there. We also do have trainings coming up locally. People like myself will come and rant at you and say a bunch of random things. But basically we have different varying levels of classes from fundamentals all the way up to very advanced architect level classes that will allow you to be better and use Puppet better. And you can also join what we call our Puppet Test Pilot Program. A lot of the applications and things that we're doing now are direct results of communicating with our customers. We have a whole team that will work with you and say, hey, what problems are you having right now, even with Puppet? Does this really work? Does this not really work? And then focus on it. And you can even check it out and join our team. We're hiring, but we're also just getting started. Thank you, everybody. Let's give, I think we have a couple minutes at least for questions. Do we, Don? If anybody has any questions, we definitely have a whole subset of Puppet folk here. Just raise your hand. I'll repeat it for the microphone for the camera. Does anybody have any sort of Puppet-related questions or anything? What I had for breakfast? Sure, up there.
Environments covered by change management, how can you schedule changes to configurations so that it's good through automatically change?
So in environments that are covered by configuration management, how can you schedule changes or things and basically not do them on demand right now, but maybe schedule for when a change window is coming up and then allow that to happen? Sure. Depends on what level of the workflow you want to focus on. Inside Puppet, we have things that are resources that will allow you to only enforce certain parts of the configuration between specific time periods. We call those a schedule resource. Or you can take it up the chain to basically an orchestration level, where you know you're going to enforce a certain subset of your Puppet code, maybe based on things called tags or enforce specific classes, but then hand that over to an orchestrated tool, where I spoke earlier about MCollective allows you to enforce those changes on demand. If you have some sort of tool up there, like a Rundeck type thing that you can, or like a ServiceNow where you can say, hey, here's our change window. We want to do these specific tasks at this time. Basically, one of those tasks can be enforcing a subset of your Puppet code at that time so that it doesn't always continuously happen. Those are some of the ways that I've seen people tackle those. Other questions? Yes?
How slightly integrated is the MCollective integration? I mean, do I have to use MCollective to orchestrate it, or can I use something like Rundeck, or would I miss out on some features?
The question was, how integrated is the MCollective orchestration? Do you have to use MCollective, or can you use something else like that? Well, with Puppet Enterprise, we set up MCollective automatically in the background. It's there should you choose to use it or not. If you have another tool out there, like you said, a run deck or whatever, you were totally free to do it to basically trigger a Puppet run at specific times, maybe a provisioning run, maybe a deployment run, things like that. People who are using the MCollective side are building their own plugins, agents for it to do specific tasks. Remove a node from a load balancer, maybe update an app, run tests, ad hoc things that they're not going to continually enforce. It is an entire separate part of Puppet. It's basically one of the parts of Puppet Enterprise. You don't have to use it, you can use it, it's there. But one of the good things about Puppet is that it's basically pluggable. It has these sort of things. And the orchestration side, you can definitely integrate with other tools if you have them. Questions? Yes?
Is the JMX metrics, are they only available in the enterprise version or also in the open source version?
The JMX metrics, are they available in the open source or in the enterprise? Those are those graphite reports and everything like that. I'm not sure, do you know if we have those out there to download? I know they do come with Puppet Enterprise. When you download 3.7, they're there. And I know somebody asked me about this, and I believe I pointed them out to a web page, docs.puppetLabs.com. There was something on the new, and I believe they're available even for the open source if you have graphite out running in a running Puppet server. Because again, the Puppet server component, the JVM, is open source that's out there. I believe it's available. Check with me later. I will look and confirm that. Yes?
Is Razor fully released now? It was some sort of beta last time.
Is Razor fully released now or not? It's in what we call a tech preview, and by that we mean, I'm not sure. No. By tech preview, we mean basically that it's still in flux. We haven't cemented the API so that we're basically, it's sort of like we're not on semantic versioning yet. We can do some crazy stuff. Sorry. It's still out on tech preview as of 3.7. I believe we're targeting the next release for something for it to be fully cemented APIs. It is able to, you are definitely able to use it out in production, but we're still under that banner right now.
That makes our higher-ups slightly nervous. It says tech preview.
I understand. Questions? Yes?
Do the metrics cover all of the components of the ship Puppet Enterprise, or is it just literally Puppet server?
Do the metrics cover all components of Puppet Enterprise or just the server side? It's basically all the tasks that are focused on the server, and that's compilation time tasks, things like you said, like function, compilation, request ratios. It's also covering the server side, so that nodes that are checking in with the Puppet Master server, that's not involved with compilation, but it's still server side. Because it's running on the server itself, those are all the things that we're getting. I don't believe we're getting any specific node-focused requests like facts that are changed on the node or anything.
More things like not implemented this.
Sorry?
Collecting stats, MQ.
So more on things like ActiveMQ for the MCollective side. No, I don't believe we're doing anything with regard to that, just because the JVM side. And because ActiveMQ is like the dirty black beast. I think that's what it says on the webpage. Any more questions? Hi, thank you.
Yeah, is the Puppet Master a particular security risk in production systems?
Is the Puppet Master a particular security risk out there in production systems? So one of the key things about the Puppet Master and the SSL encryption and everything we have is that it's basically a lesser security risk for all your nodes that you're managing, because if somebody compromises one of your nodes, all we're shipping down is that catalog full of information just about that node. That node doesn't get all the manifests and modules from about every other node out there. Now you're asking about the server component. The server component clearly does have to have all the modules and manifests. If you're using Hier, it needs to have that data, things like that. So much like any other service that requires data, yes, there's always going to be a risk that's out there. Were there any specific questions about security on the Puppet Master side?
It's just our systems admin team are particularly concerned about using Puppet for applications higher up from the VMs. Because they're worried that if that gets compromised, everything gets compromised.
So the response was higher ups are worried about using Puppet to manage things like applications, because if the server side gets compromised, then everything gets compromised. As with any service that's running out there, if your server does get compromised, yes, you do have some risk. One of the focuses is to actually manage that process outside of your server so that your servers basically become spurious and they're pulling from somewhere to get their configuration versus people that are actually going on the master server and making changes. So that basically if somebody makes a change there, it's pulling and it's going to get overwritten anywhere. That's the best process that we're using right now. And we've got customers that are even deploying Puppet master servers out there in cloud, even outside of VPC, because they're basically pulling or pushing from somewhere else that component out there. There's somebody in the back waving at me. I think it was related to them, maybe. Yeah.
How easy to do reverse engineering?
How easy is it to reverse engineer?
I got the production system. I want to get all the configuration from the base system. What are the configuration vectors? Is it possible to pull out?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
You got the production system, which got all the user and the services and the component installed. I got the development system, which got just client Linux or Windows boxes. Is there any way I can pick up the configuration and all things from the existing production?
So basically the question was, you have a production system that's got configurations for, Windows, Linux servers out there. You also have a development-based system. How easy is it to basically take your production system, clone it over there in a development system and do that? If you're using one of our tools like R10K that allows you to basically from one central manifest run repository to basically say, hey, spin up a new environment, cloning that, basically you're branching a repository. It's pretty easy to actually very quickly take a clone of what your production environment is in a test environment and then make changes to that, test that change out, and then merge those back in with production. That's our standard workflow that we do. And if you use one of those tools like R10K, it becomes very, very easy. If you're not automating how your Puppet master server is being set up, you can still do it, but it's a lot of manual process of cloning modules over here, copying things. Basically, you're just going to be sitting on top of, CP-R. So it all depends on your workflow. We have customers that are doing it really easily right now.
Even if you do the Puppet for the first time.
Even if you're doing the Puppet installation for the first time, so you're just getting started?
Getting started, we got the production, we got the development system. So when we install the Puppet on board the system, how will you replicate the configuration from the production?
Okay, so you're spinning up a new one. How do you replicate what you already have over there? Basically, there's a couple of key things. All of your modules, a main Puppet file called site.pp, and if you want your SSL infrastructure, the SSL directory that contains your certificate authority, all of your certs and public keys and private keys, yes, you can replicate those over, and then bump your services. There are things like permissions that you'll have to check, but yes, you can do that, and it's not terribly difficult. It's basically replicating syncing directories over. Time do we have? A couple more?
You get a couple more.
Sure.
How well does it work with containers, Linux containers?
How well does Puppet work with Linux containers? Things like Docker? You're able to run Puppet inside of Docker, and that's what a lot of people are doing. If you check back from Puppet Conf this year, James Turnbull gave a talk on using Docker with Puppet and how that integration works. Basically, a lot of people are doing the immutable containerization, spinning up a container, and then using Puppet or Puppet Apply or Puppet Agent to configure the node the way that it wants to. But also there's other people that are breaking down that application into its own container, and containers are turning into like the next golden image-based thing where now I need another container, another one there. We have customers doing both that are basically saying, hey, I've already used Puppet, but this whole containerization for this one specific part actually does work. I recommend you check out James's talk, the video from that. He goes way more in depth than it, other than for me to say, yes, I know we have customers that are doing that right now. Yes?
The Puppet Enterprise dashboard is great, but how do you see the open source dashboards evolving? You particularly mentioned Puppet Board.
Thank you. The question was, the Puppet Enterprise console is great. How do you see the open source dashboard? We had a project that we actually owned called Puppet Dashboard that we released back over to the community. Soda Brew, what is his name? I only know Aaron. I can't remember. I only know him by GitHub names. Basically, he took control of it. Aaron Stone. Merged it over to Rails 3, kept up there. There's also Puppet Board that's out there. There's also Puppet Explorer that people have done. We're allowing, our focus on it is We, on our Puppet Enterprise product, want to use the same APIs that we expose to you to build really cool products. We're not going to do anything in the background. We're not going to have an open source dashboard because we don't want to split our levels of development. That's what we were seeing. We want to focus on our one enterprise product, but to expose the APIs so that we can have these tools like Puppet Board and Puppet Explorer that are using the same APIs to get the same bit of data out there. That's the focus that we're working on. Any more? Oh, right there.
So Puppet seems to be quite good at making changes to nodes, but how do you deal with rollbacks when doing stuff?
Puppet's good at making changes to nodes, but how do we handle rollback? That is a whole hour and a half talk called Rollback is a Lie and Other Things Your Mother Told You. So rollback itself is one of those hard concepts because you don't truly get full rollback unless you have things like snapshots because, you know, things happen. You deployed an app, it failed. When you want to revert it to another previously enforced state, you're basically rolling forward to a state that worked before. But with things like Puppet, you may know that when Puppet manages a piece of your system, it's really good at that. But when Puppet stops managing it, it ignores it. It doesn't remove it. This is a good thing because if you don't manage all of your packages, it doesn't wipe everything out. But it can be a bad thing because if all of a sudden it's just not managing a file that was there in a previous version, now you're in trouble. How do you handle that? Well, you can either write the reversed manifests to actually check for those files, which can be tedious and laborious. You can have virtualized environments that just spin up, so you spin up a new one of those and bring it up to the previous state so that you don't have any flux that's out there. Those are a couple of ways that people are targeting it. And they're usually finding that moving to a more ephemeral infrastructure, things that are out there on virtualized environments is a bit easier, but sometimes they can't do that. We have physical nodes. We're not just going to re-kick and provision it, so then we have to take into account maybe files that are there. It's all about how you write your manifests. We have tools that allow you to do things like files in a directory that aren't in the Puppet catalog, we can automatically purge out. We can do that for users and groups. So we have tools and tricks inside the Puppet code to allow you to do that. But yeah, that is a typical known problem. I think we might have time for one more. I swear I had something to put back. No more? One more, there.
Do you see Docker as a direct competitor?
Do you see Docker as a direct competitor? Do I personally? As of right now, we're really not seeing it as a direct competitor in the same way we don't see virtualization as a direct competitor. It's something that we're also using together. It's another tool for something that maybe might have a better focus. How I'm seeing it is it's still brand new, that I'm not seeing it a lot in production. We're seeing customers that are playing around with it and seeing how it could be a cool thing, having some problems underneath with SE Linux context, with not having direct kernel access, stuff like that. So right now I think people are really hesitant to see what's going to happen, but they're excited because it opens up a new potential. So right now, no, we're not perceiving it as a direct threat. Thank you, everybody, for dealing with my hour-long tirade. We have a whole lot more in store. Thank you so much.